The Batman exists as a commentary on not just superheroes, but the way we perceive heroes in general, from a multitude of perspectives that carefully dissects and examines the trials and tribulations of Bruce Wayne, as he navigates the criminal underworld of Gotham to stop the Riddler. This story teaches Bruce not just what it takes to become the superhero we all know and love, but also what he shouldn't become along the way, how his view of justice is wrong and skewed. The film teaches Batman what it means to be a hero. Matt Reeves went in an incredibly unique direction with his Batman compared to previous incarnations. This version of the character is in his second year of crime fighting and hasn't fully discovered who he wants to be. The costume reflects this, as his batsuit is an amalgamation of different textures and materials, with a mainly leather cowl held together with stitching and a broken nose shape that takes a diversion from the pointed nose of prior versions. The heavy bulk of his torso area gives him a large layer of protection, and looks like it was pieced together from different body armours to create. There are various additional pieces of armour and extra padding to the arms to make Batman look like he is capable of fighting, but isn't comfortable with his current build. This is something previously exemplified in the Arkham video games, in which Arkham Origins, the canonical first entry, has Bruce in a bulky batsuit that is heavily armoured, but as the game goes on, he becomes more comfortable and the design becomes sleeker to fit his expertise and years of experience. The homemade style of this suit gives us the impression of a Batman in his youth, and one that isn't fully formed yet going into this story, which gives way for him to be a little off character, as it can be excused as him not fully being the Batman. This is best shown more with Bruce Wayne, as he doesn't resemble the comic counterpart at all, living the life of a recluse rock star with unkept hair and a disregard to carry on the Wayne's legacy, which is a far cry from the charismatic and charming Bruce in the comics. This Bruce is rawer and more aggressive. He hasn't honed his skills and is only just building out his arsenal. The Batmobile is also a significant departure, whereas Bale's Tumbler was a sleek and perfected, well-honed machine built precisely for its purpose. The hunk of muscle car Bruce uses here is loud and angry with a gothic design which takes away some of the clean precision of prior Batmobiles and instead gives us a machine that is completely unpredictable and a personification of the fear that Batman wants to inflict onto his enemies. Much akin to his comic book appearances, we also see Bruce adopt a disguise to use in public spaces, going by the name The Drifter, sporting several layers and a face mask with either a cap or motorbike helmet to disguise his true silhouette, giving Bruce an advantage during the daytime scenes where his detective skills can only go so far. The Drifter represents the side of Bruce Wayne that he is willing to show, the personification of how he feels on the inside, protected by several layers and afraid to be himself. In future incarnations, Bruce Wayne would adopt the billionaire rich boy persona during his daytime escapades, but this is currently the only way for Bruce to traverse the streets during the day, as a battered and dirty husk of his nocturnal persona. At the beginning of the film, we see Bruce take out vengeance on a group of thugs. He emerges from the shadows as a death bell tolls. The people of Gotham are running in fear from the onslaught the Batman is bringing down on the city, and this opening demonstrates that Batman rules out of fear. He uses the idea of him waiting to punish the wicked as a tool to scare away criminals. Whilst he saves a man's life from assault, he also scares that man in the process, causing both him and the gang to have the same lasting impression of the Batman. They see him as a threat, not as a hero. We hear news reports shortly after, confirming that the city doesn't side with Batman's cause, and views him as a crazy lunatic running around. Only Jim Gordon seems to trust his judgment, as even the police have a shaky relationship with him. This is further emphasised later when Batman's relationship with the GCPD wears thin and he finds himself without the support of the law as they turn against him for his mistakes. Matt Reeves presents us with a Batman with no idea who he wants to be, The Nolan trilogy spoke a lot about being a symbol and a message to inspire others, whereas this Batman is something very unhinged and dangerous. He knows that the city is a sinkhole of corruption and has a moral good to want to improve it, and not become a consequence of it like his parents did. So his initial motivation is front and centre, however he doesn't know how to spread his ideal amongst the others to make a bigger difference. Bruce acts solely on his own. He goes out and beats people up in the hopes that it will improve the city. But all we see is that the city has sunken further because of it, with crime and theft at an all-time high, the inverse of what Bruce wants his effect on the city to be, and leaves him pondering how this has happened. That's where the Riddler comes into play. Edward Nashton has a following from the second he shows up on screen. His political messaging and terrorist acts make him a real activist for change by targeting the real problems with Gotham, the rich and the corrupt. The people being on the back end of the city share his wishes for a true renewal of Gotham, and while it's not a majority, this gives us an explanation as to how crime has risen in Gotham. As the Riddler says himself, he is a response to Batman. He wears a mask and uses his mind to take out Gotham officials, and does more work than Batman does to expose the issues with the city. Throughout the film, Bruce is referred to as an upper class, taking advantage of his wealth and luxury. Firstly, Alfred calls him out on destroying his family's legacy by not leading his father's company and instead spending his inherited riches on the Batman arsenal. Then we have Selina commenting on how he must be from a rich background because he has no concept of what people in Gotham go through on a day-to-day basis. Finally, the Riddler himself berates Bruce Wayne for his privilege and how he became the face of orphans everywhere without showing a true reflection of what it means to be one. This criticism is a fair one. Even in the comics, Batman Year One explores Bruce's relationship with the city in a similar way as he enters Gotham by private jet, and comments on how this irritates him and he should have taken a mode of transport that immersed him in his surroundings. Juxtaposed with Jim Gordon entering Gotham through heaps of rain and traffic and wishing he was anywhere else. Batman in the comics acknowledged that he was from a richer background and purposefully placed himself amongst the people to understand who he was fighting for before he even had the idea for Batman. By changing this detail and putting Bruce in a place where he acts purely out of anger and frustration from the city provides a commentary on classism and whether what Bruce thinks the people want is actually what they want. Bruce targets the gang members, but they are the lowest on the list of people causing problems, and terrifying gangs will only cause them to further retaliate or take out their anger elsewhere. Bruce targets them because he thinks that muggers are the problem, and he wouldn't dare think that the rich officials could be at fault, as even his own father is called out in front of him for his sins. To quote another Batman movie, "You drove them to the point of desperation, and in that desperation, they turned to a man they didn't fully understand. The citizens of Gotham became so afraid of Batman and feeling like they were unable to combat the corruption in Gotham that they turned to join with the Riddler as he goes on his crusade against the city. Riddler's plan in the film is to slowly but surely uncover Gotham's crumbling foundation and expose both the police and Carmine Falcone for holding the city in their palms for over 20 years, as they ran the city from the underground, which didn't give the people a chance to be heard or for their conditions to improve. This is what leads Riddler to use that anger of the crowd to take arms and shoot the surviving members of Riddler's Genesis flood to recreate the city after its sins, giving way to an uncertain Gotham that I'm sure will get expanded on in the sequel, but the fallout of this flood leads to a new mayor inspiring the city to start again, and proving that there will still be uncorrupted members of higher society that can be a force of good, much like how Jim shows it possible in the GCPD. Riddler's plan becomes personal late in the game, as one of his final targets is Bruce Wayne himself, which puts the back burner on the main plot and gives a major unravelling of the Wayne's backstory, which helps Bruce to see what he values most. In the introduction scene for Alfred in the Batcave, Bruce remarks that being Batman is his family's legacy, and instead of continuing in the public eye, he wishes to use their resources to save the city, and in a way that suits him. Throughout the course of the film, we see his trust in his parents waver. Martha Wayne witnessed death from a young age. She was frequently in and out of hospital, which gives the audience reason to believe that Bruce may be mentally unhinged himself. The comic Earth 1 explored this in detail, suggesting that the Batman persona could be an extension of his mother's, and therefore Bruce's, mental illness. In the film, Martha was in and out of mental hospitals using Thomas's money to fund her treatment, which was kept quiet from the public. It's a way of showing the rich being able to use their unlimited resources to keep up appearances and influence the city around them, as Thomas not only pays for her treatment, but keeps her true surname hidden from the press, as she is revealed to be an Arkham, a name which carries heavy connotations if you've read A Serious House on Serious Earth, or played any of the video games. However, the importance here is that after both of her parents met grisly fates, there had become a bad aura around the family name that Thomas Wayne wished to avoid. Bruce believed his father to be a good man, and one that wanted to lift the city out from the gutter with $1 billion renewal fund that would protect the city's infrastructure and be a benefit to finally affect the citizens and not the upper classes. When a reporter exposed Martha's secret, Thomas turned to Carmine Falcone to cover it up, only for him to murder the reporter, putting blood indirectly on Thomas's hands. This caused a falling out between him and Falcone that could have led to the Waynes' death. However, it's never confirmed, but either way, the Waynes are killed in a back alley before the renewal fund could be made, and so it lurks around Gotham City as a grim reminder of the bright future that was cut down and now rests inside Bruce Wayne's pockets. Learning all this information informs Bruce that his parents weren't the squeaky clean members of society he thought they were, and he realises he must rectify his parents' mistakes in order to save the ones he loves. When Bruce is targeted by the Riddler, Alfred is hospitalised by a hidden explosive, and this is where Bruce sees the responsibility he inherited from his parents, and he no longer becomes the Batman for them, but from discovering that it is what he wants when talking to Alfred. Bruce is also fighting from a place of fear, as he says he is not afraid of dying, but he is afraid of losing someone else after the heavy toll on his health that losing his parents caused him. He wants to avoid killing anyone as to not repeat the mistakes that put him in his current situation. When Falcone is murdered by the Riddler, Bruce looks up to the streetlight as he did as a child, first with his parents, and now with the only man that could have brought closure to their deaths. He sees his true impact hasn't been achieved, while the Riddler is still out there, and this emphasises their differences in methods and why the Riddler is such a prominent threat in the film, because as long as he's out there, Batman is unable to prevent lives being lost. Bruce may be willing to lay down his life, but he is scared of being exposed for who he truly is, much like the rest of Gotham's elite, and especially his parents. Riddler draws this comparison directly when he says he'll unmask Gotham. We get multiple instances built up in which it's implied that the Riddler has put the pieces together and knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and this causes Bruce to panic and miss several pieces of crucial information, such as watching the video that reveals Riddler's plan to flood Gotham, but because he's scared it will reveal his secret identity, he chooses to steer away from the GCPD investigating it further, and they miss the biggest clue which costs them the entire film. I think because of Bruce's strong disassociation, he was terrified of who he would need to become if he had to embody Bruce Wayne entirely, and could no longer be Batman. The escapism Batman offers him gives him a personality he can rely on, as a manifestation of vengeance for his parents. Life as Bruce Wayne doesn't matter to Bruce, and the idea of the Batman persona being stripped from him once people know his identity terrifies him to the point of making this mistake. This comes to a head in the scene where Riddler and Batman finally sit down and talk, and it's revealed that Riddler assumed Batman was in on it the whole time, to bring down the corruption, only for Batman to put him in his place, calling him a psychopath that will rot in Arkham. Bruce is naturally furious that Riddler could have exposed his identity, but worse that he thought Batman was his accomplice in his terrorist acts. Riddler, however, berates Bruce Wayne in a cleverly written scene where it's unclear if Riddler knows or not. However, ultimately, he is revealed to not know that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and he says he thought Batman and him would team up to kill Wayne, showing he is completely unaware and that the Riddler's plan has a flaw. He wasn't betting on Bruce Wayne to survive. Bruce was a privileged orphan whilst Edward Nashton was directly affected by the Wayne's death, as the renewal fund did not reach his orphanage, causing his life to become much darker, with a worse quality of life. Riddler sees himself as the one to baptise Gotham, but he never accounts for the good people in Gotham. He sees it as black and white, and it's how his plan fails to leave the city in anarchy. In the finale, when Gotham is being flooded and Riddler's followers are taking fire at the survivors, the last of them repeats Batman's iconic line, "I'm vengeance." Bruce sees here the dark path he was so close to being led down. Everything Bruce embodied himself to be, being spoken by a terrorist, makes him rethink everything up until this point. He inspired this. He was the reason Riddler felt confidence to put on a mask and enact his sick game. Batman made his villains, and they thank him for it. When Bruce realises this, he spiritually sacrifices himself and becomes baptised, emerging not as vengeance, but as hope, a positive influence that looks forward to the future of Gotham, instead of dwelling in the sins of its past. Together with the mayor, we see the sun rise on Gotham City. Batman is not fighting off the criminal element, but instead saving people and getting them to safety, putting his violent past behind him and working to save the city for everyone and not just to avenge his parents, and proving himself to be a hero and not a burden. If there's one thing the Batman succeeds at, it's this: showing what it takes to be a hero, thinking of the bigger picture and seeing the real villains the world has to offer. Batman loses in this film. The Riddler's plan works and Gotham is flooded, wiping away any authority and corruption with it. But he didn't count on the people that survived, banding together and working to save the citizens because they believed in the city and spread that message of hope and the renewal that Thomas Wayne always strived for. But it's not just in name only. And as long as people believe in Gotham, there will be a Batman there to save it.